I was there, hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a...
Really? I thought...
Well, was it? Well, I can tell you now, it was the worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did, because Harry was determined to keep the newspapers away. For me, it was a disaster. And...
Well, was that deliberate? You were made to feel unwelcome
I
at the
felt
wedding?
so. I felt... It wasn't just me, it was the whole of the British press. You know, they were, in many ways, badly treated. I think it was... Harry was angry. I think it was a bit, well, I think it was a little bit insolent.
Ever been at a wedding where the couple treats centuries of royal tradition like it's just a movie set? Arthur Edwards has, and he still calls it a nightmare. This wasn't just any photographer. This was the man trusted to capture Charles and Diana's magic, William and Kate's fairy tale, and even 2 coronations. So when he flat out says Meghan and Harry's wedding was the worst royal event he ever covered,
everything was done on long lenses. I mean, Akaito had an 800mm lens photographing the guests arriving. And
you know it's not just gossip, it's a bombshell. On TV, the whole world saw glittering perfection, the kind of staged theater polished for global cameras. But inside Windsor, Edwards swears the truth was nothing short of miserable.
Was they engaged for the job, was 5 feet away, you know, it was just hopeless. And then the carriage shot, when they went past me in the carriage, they looked the other way.
Guests weren't smiling from joy. They were boiling under that scorching sun, fanning themselves while sweat ruined their designer clothes. Makeup melted, hair collapsed, and whispers of disbelief spread like wildfire through the pews. He remembers people rolling their eyes, muttering, "This is unbearable," as the hours dragged on.
Been said about Meghan, and quite rightly, some of the things that were said about Meghan during the engagement were pretty harsh. I want to sort of mention them now, but some of them were pretty unfair as well. And so he was angry.
And here's the kicker. Edwards didn't leave feeling let down. He left feeling disgusted. Not once, but twice he uses that word. Disgusted at the atmosphere. Disgusted at the way the entire event tossed aside tradition in favor of Hollywood spectacle.
And I felt, you know, we were punished for that. And in fact, I never got one picture in the paper published.
For a man who has always honored the crown with his lens, this wedding wasn't a celebration of love or history. It was a circus. And in his eyes, Meghan and Harry were the ringleaders. It wasn't just bad. Arthur Edwards swears it was a straight-up disaster.
I think, you know, I've done some really lovely royal weddings. I did both King Charles's weddings. I did William's wedding. I did.
But before we break down the chaos, you need to understand exactly who this man is. He's not some bitter columnist scribbling headlines or a random outsider throwing shade. Edwards has been the royals' personal lens since 1977, nearly half a century of service behind the camera. Think about that.
They were lovely occasions, but that today, I couldn't get out of Windsor quick enough, I promise you that.
The worst royal wedding to cover.
Yeah, and then when the baby was born, when Archie was born, that was another, in my view, a disaster, because I knew we was not going to get a picture of it.
For almost 50 years, he's been invited into the family's most sacred spaces.
William was born, and Harry was born, and George, and Charlotte, and Louis. We got great pictures outside the hospital, I remember. And William and Catherine especially, they made such a...
This is the guy who stood at the heart of Charles and Diana's fairy tale wedding, then returned to capture Diana's heartbreaking farewell. He witnessed William and Kate's flawless love story unfold through his lens, and he was right there for King Charles's coronation. His portfolio is jaw-dropping. 7 royal weddings, 5 state funerals, 8 royal births, and practically every historic moment the monarchy has staged since the late 70s.
Oh, their new baby. But I mean, I say this, but
Edwards isn't just a photographer. He's practically an archivist of royal bloodlines, a man trusted by monarchs themselves. So when he says Meghan and Harry's wedding was unlike anything he'd ever seen, and not in a good way, it hits different. Even the royals themselves hold Arthur Edwards in high regard. William and Kate have gone out of their way to thank him publicly, and Harry once joked around with him during shoots like they were old pals. This isn't some photographer kept at arm's length.
His baby Archie was almost teething before we found out it was born, you know. I mean, it was,
Edwards was welcomed inside, trusted, and treated like part of the circle. He knows the protocols down to the smallest detail, the traditions that outsiders never get to see, and the messy behind-the-scenes reality that the palace works so hard to hide. So when he declares Meghan and Harry's wedding as the single worst event he's ever covered, those words land like a thunderbolt. This isn't clickbait. This isn't rumor. It's the harsh verdict of the monarchy's most trusted eye, a man who has chronicled their highs and lows for nearly 50 years. Edwards wasn't speculating. He was standing right there, camera in hand, forced to watch the spectacle crumble in real time.
When the baby had been born many hours earlier, we were led to believe it was going to be a home birth, and it was at a hospital. There was that. The whole thing was just.
And the very first disaster he points to? The unbearable heat. The one thing that set the entire day on fire. And not in a good way. Arthur Edwards can't forget the Windsor sun that day. It was brutal, pounding down on guests trapped in that chapel with no escape. Women clutched their fans like lifelines, mascara streaming down faces as makeup slid off in streaks. Designer gowns clung uncomfortably to damp skin, and hairstyles worth thousands collapsed before the vows had even begun.
In fact, I never stayed in Windsor. There was a royal tour to Germany with the King and Queen, and I went with them.
What the world imagined as refined elegance felt more like survival mode. Edwards recalls rows of guests looking utterly miserable, fanning themselves in desperation, their discomfort impossible to disguise no matter how wide the smiles looked on camera. The reality: behind every polished close-up, there wasn't magic. There was sweat. There wasn't elegance. There was suffocation.
Camilla in I think Munich, the first pictures of Archie that was taken by the Press Association. I remember showing her on my phone, and she said, and that was the first time she saw him. So.
For Edwards, this wasn't just a case of bad weather luck. He swears it felt intentional, as if guest comfort never even made the list of priorities. The whole thing screamed Hollywood glitz, staged for cameras, with zero thought for the people actually living through it. He describes the broadcast as a lie, a shiny illusion hiding chaos just out of frame. And coming from a man who has braved torrential rain, icy winds, and ceremonies of every scale, his words sting. Edwards insists this was the most miserable royal event of his entire career.
It was difficult times. I have to say, though, that first year of Meghan, that working with her on the road.
What was meant to be the ultimate celebration of love instead played out like a punishment. And as he warns, the heat was only the beginning of a long, ugly list of failures. Because the real slap in the face. That came next. The real slap in the face, according to Edwards, came with the seating plan. And he still can't hide his disgust when he talks about it. He remembers looking around that chapel and realizing the best seats weren't reserved for the royals who carried centuries of duty on their backs. No, they were handed to Hollywood strangers who had barely exchanged more than a hello with Meghan and Harry before the big day.
And I was saying this, I thought she was a great asset to the family. And I kept asking the palace if we could have a meeting with her. The royal people, the people who cover the royals, could have a meeting with Meghan, like we did with Catherine.
Oprah Winfrey, who Edwards says had almost no personal history with the couple, sat front and center like a queen herself. The Clooneys, who later admitted they didn't even know Harry and Meghan that well, were positioned like VIP royalty. Their faces were staged perfectly for the cameras, while the people who actually built the monarchy's legacy, senior royals, decorated military veterans, and lifelong family allies, were shoved to the back rows, left squinting to even see the ceremony unfold.
Who was writing about her and photographing her. And I was assured it was going to happen, but it never did. And
for Edwards, the insult couldn't have been clearer. This wasn't a wedding steeped in royal tradition. It was pure Hollywood staging. He remembers thinking the whole thing felt more like a red carpet movie premiere than a sacred family celebration. In his eyes, decades of loyalty, service, and sacrifice were tossed aside, all so celebrities could get the spotlight simply because they'd photograph better. Edwards says the insult cut so deep he could only joke about it, bitterly. He quipped that he practically needed a jeep to even find his seat.
Mind up that they were going, and that was it. But
you get a sense that they made, if you're talking about the wedding, everyone was made to feel unwelcome.
Not everybody, just the British
press.
His view blocked like he was some outsider with no history. Imagine that. A man who had documented royal life for decades, shoved aside while Hollywood elites strutted proudly into the front rows. Guests around him whispered in disbelief.
All my life, and then Oprah Winfrey had met them once. She was a guest. The Clooneys, the guests. Never met them before, but they were the guests. And
Edwards insists everyone understood the message loud and clear. Family came second, image came first. And then came the ultimate clash, Meghan and Harry's calculated war with the press. Edwards recalls the humiliation vividly. Seasoned royal photographers, professionals who had served faithfully for decades, were pushed to absurd distances, forced to drag out massive telephoto lenses just to snag simple arrival shots.
Myself, this is all showbiz rubbish,
Did you get a sense then that they were...
It wasn't incompetence. It wasn't about safety. It felt like punishment. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's hand-picked photographers, their personal favorites, were granted prime spots just a few feet away, snapping every detail with ease. To Edwards, the setup reeked of revenge. Harry had been boiling with anger over how Meghan was covered during their engagement, and in his eyes, the wedding wasn't just a celebration of love.
Showbiz that they weren't interested. If they weren't interested in making people feel welcome at the wedding, it just seems to me they made a decision back in 7 years ago.
Well, I'm looking. I mean, Oprah Winfrey was there, and
it was a weapon, a stage to lash out at the press, turning what should have been a unifying day into a grudge match. The most iconic image of any royal wedding is always the carriage shot, the timeless photo that cements history. But Edward swears Meghan and Harry deliberately ruined it. As the carriage rolled past the press, the couple turned their faces away, flat out denying photographers the shot that every royal wedding before had delivered.
Big interview they did with Oprah Winfrey. And most of that interview was left on the cutting room floor because it was so one-sided and it was so unfair.
For Edwards, who had captured Charles and Diana's magical carriage ride, an image that became a global symbol, it was crushing. He says he couldn't get a single usable picture, not one, and he insists it wasn't an accident. It was a calculated snub, a cold move meant to send a message. Harry had weaponized his wedding day, choosing grudges over duty and bitterness over tradition. Edwards describes the moment as hopeless, the entire press corps punished like misbehaving children.
And the bit about Archie and the colour of his skin, I knew they'd be seething. I knew the Queen would be seething. I knew that
Instead of being treated as the chroniclers of royal history, they were shoved aside as if they were intruders. And just when guests thought the drama couldn't sink any lower, the reception delivered the final insult. Edwards remembers the stunned whispers as trays came out, finger foods and dainty canapes replacing the grandeur of a royal banquet. Avocado toast bites, delicate macarons, trendy brunch food at what was supposed to be the state wedding of the decade.
So unfair, because one thing they're not is racist, they are not. I've been with...
Guests expecting regal feasts were left picking at crumbs, wondering if they had stumbled into a fashion launch party instead of a royal celebration. Distinguished guests who had flown in from around the world, dressed to the nines at enormous expense, were left picking at scraps. Some slipped out of the reception early, their stomachs empty. Others couldn't hold back and openly complained, whispering that the food was an embarrassment.
I've never seen only just engaging and enjoying the company of these people. So, it wouldn't be...
For Edwards, the symbolism was clear. Like everything else that day,
Edwards says he was stunned, not because the palace lacked resources, but because the downgrade was deliberate. This wasn't a matter of modest choices or budget restraints. The royal family had the means to put on a banquet worthy of history. Instead, Meghan and Harry chose style over substance, curating dishes that looked sleek in glossy photos but left actual people hungry. The symbolism hit Edwards hard. Just like every other decision that day, the menu screamed performance over authenticity.
And it was just an unfair thing to say. But it was she delivered it like an actress delivered it, and Oprah responded going, wow, as though like it.
A wedding designed for Instagram, not family. Minimalism wasn't elegance here. It was an insult, proof in his eyes that the couple cared far more about optics than experience, about how things appeared rather than how they truly felt. And for Edwards, that was the most painful truth of all.
Awful, and then of course some of the Netflix stuff and the book. Oh God, it was dreadful. But
so to confirm, Arthur, you did.
It wasn't just the heat, the snubs, or the avocado toast. It was watching centuries of tradition being demolished in real time. Royal weddings had always been about sacred ritual woven with timeless continuity, and this one shattered that legacy right in front of him. Charles and Diana, William and Kate.
Wedding
I'll tell you what, no, I don't even, I'm surprised it lasted that long. No, many people said it wouldn't. It has, they obviously, they're probably happy to get.
Their weddings weren't just love stories, they were statements of loyalty, stability, and respect for the crown. But Meghan and Harry, Edwards swears their ceremony ripped up the playbook. To him, it didn't feel like a royal union at all. It felt like a Hollywood production staged for maximum drama.
They're all mad, of course, is that the children don't get to see their grandfather, either grandfather, you know, and that's really so awful.
Traditional vows were tweaked, sacred protocols tossed aside, and even the sermon came off less like a blessing and more like a theatrical monologue meant to trend online. Edwards describes it as if the couple were actively rebranding the monarchy, flipping an ancient ritual into a flashy viral moment. The result, he says, was chaos instead of continuity, self-promotion instead of unity.
And to know their cousins, and it's such a shame for them.
Yeah, it is. Happier times this week.
Guests who truly understood the weight of royal history were horrified, whispering that they were witnessing something dangerous. Not a gentle modernization, but a mockery of what the crown stood for. And the damage didn't stop once the bells stopped ringing. Edwards insists the fallout from that day seeped into the royal family for years to come, poisoning ties that were already fragile and leaving scars that still haven't healed.
You talked about 50 years, your golden anniversary, but you've done a lot of this. Can you just give a flavour of what it's like? Many people haven't attended the Buckingham Palace garden party.
Yeah.
I mean, they're, the highlight in the calendar for many people if you get a ticket.
Charles and Diana, William and Kate, their weddings weren't just love stories. They were statements of loyalty, stability, and respect for the crown. But Meghan and Harry, Edward swears their ceremony ripped up the playbook. To him, it didn't feel like a royal union at all. It felt like a Hollywood production staged for maximum drama. Traditional vows were tweaked, sacred protocols tossed aside, and even the sermon came off less like a blessing and more like a theatrical monologue meant to trend online.
How it works here, when the Queen says you can't do something, you can't do it. And that's it. I mean, she's not saying it because she's being spiteful to Harry.
Edwards describes it as if the couple were actively rebranding the monarchy, flipping an ancient ritual into a flashy viral moment. The result, he says, was chaos instead of continuity, self-promotion instead of unity. Guests who truly understood the weight of royal history were horrified, whispering that they were witnessing something dangerous. Not a gentle modernization, but a mockery of what the crown stood for. And the damage didn't stop once the bells stopped ringing.
Because it's the law, it's part of the Companies Act, and you can't do that. And you certainly can't use a royal title.
Edwards insists the fallout from that day seeped into the royal family for years to come, poisoning ties that were already fragile and leaving scars that still haven't healed. Edwards says Meghan and Harry's Oprah interview wasn't a tell-all. It was an encore, and it was twice as ruthless as the wedding itself. For 90 minutes straight, the couple leveled accusations of racism, cruelty, and betrayal against the very institution that raised them.
Prince Edward, when he married Sophie, he had a film production company and Sophie had a PR company. And they both had to pack that up because it was conflicting with their royal duties.
To Edwards, it wasn't courage. It was theater. He calls the interview a stunt, not a confession, insisting every detail was staged to maximize sympathy and supercharge their brand. They weren't trying to heal old wounds. They were trying to blow the monarchy wide open on primetime TV.
People have tried it, but it doesn't work, and the Queen doesn't want you to do that. Now, some royals, people say, well, the Duke of York's, Prince Andrew's girls, usually in bit.
And the plan worked. Headlines detonated across the globe, sympathy poured in, and once again, Meghan and Harry's relevance shot through the roof.
And I think the other one does something similar. And that's just not for commercial gain, that is because they have to earn an income, because they're not.
But Edwards says the price was catastrophic. Children cut off from grandparents, trust shattered beyond repair, and royal dignity buried just to feed the spectacle. In his eyes, the real tragedy wasn't the allegations themselves, but the way they were packaged and sold. Every accusation turned into content. Every fracture became marketable.
He knows that. And I think the fact that the Queen let them do everything, let them keep Frogmore Cottage, come and go when they want, and left the door open for them to return to the royal family after a year.
The monarchy wasn't just criticized, it was humiliated on American television, while Meghan and Harry cashed in on the fallout. Looking back now, Edwards is convinced Meghan and Harry's wedding fiasco wasn't just bad luck or sloppy planning. It was the blueprint, the chaos, the snubs, the rule-breaking. None of it felt random. To him, it was a carefully calculated script.
Statement and put it on their website. It was insolent. Yeah, I think it was it just speaks of lack of respect.
The wedding was never about honoring the monarchy, he argues. It was a launchpad, the pilot episode for the Meghan and Harry brand. Every misstep became a talking point, every insult became ammunition, and every scandal turned into cold, hard currency. What the world thought was a messy royal day, Edwards claims, was actually the opening act of a billion-dollar business plan.
Harry's chosen to quit the royal family. That's fair enough. Everybody should determine what they do in life. But if you're doing that...
From Netflix mega deals to explosive book contracts, the Sussexes learned to monetize every ounce of drama. Edwards says the wedding was not a fairy tale ending at all. It was the beginning of a global franchise. By rejecting tradition, humiliating family, and weaponizing victimhood,
can't, as they say, have your cake and eat it. But I don't think that'll affect them anyway. I think that
Meghan and Harry wrote the perfect narrative to sell over and over again. A royal scandal packaged as entertainment. And the most shocking part? Edwards admits it worked. Meghan and Harry flipped the script completely, transforming themselves from duty-bound royals into global celebrities, from family members into full-blown media moguls. The monarchy handed them a sacred stage, and instead of honoring it, they used it as a launchpad to build an empire, leaving scorched earth in their wake.
In huge demand, whether they're called royal or not, I don't think it will affect them at all.
So despite the Sussexes dropping the word royal from their foundation, is it right that they should go out and make a load of money off their royal backgrounds?
I don't think
For Arthur Edwards, a man who had witnessed every defining royal moment for nearly 5 decades, this wedding wasn't just a disappointment. It was the most cold, calculated betrayal of royal tradition in modern history. A deliberate demolition dressed up as a fairy tale. What do you think? Was this the wedding that truly exposed Meghan and Harry's master plan? Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.